My name is Hilda Winters, and at 67, I finally bought my dream oceanfront home in Newport after 40 years of nursing and careful saving. For 12 years, my son James and his family pretended I was invisible. No calls, no visits, nothing. Then everything changed. The morning after I moved in, the doorbell rang. There they stood with suitcases, smiles plastered on faces I barely recognized anymore. Life has a funny way of coming full circle. If you are watching this, I would love to know where you are viewing from. Please hit that like button and subscribe so you can join me on this journey of discovering how I reminded them where they had been all these years. I spent 4 decades as a nurse at Portland General Hospital, dedicating my life to caring for others. My husband Frank died of a sudden heart attack when our son James was 25, leaving just the 2 of us to rely on each other. In those early years after Frank's death, James and I were incredibly close. He would come over every Sunday for dinner, call me several times a week, and always remembered my birthday and Mother's Day with thoughtful gifts. I was there when he graduated from college, got his first real job at an accounting firm, and bought his first house. We had the kind of relationship many mothers and sons would envy. I never tried to control his life, but I was always there when he needed advice or support. Everything changed when James met Amanda at a company Christmas party. She was beautiful, ambitious, and working in the marketing department of his firm. From the beginning, something felt off about her, but I kept my concerns to myself. James was 30 when they started dating, and within 6 months he proposed. I remember the day he brought her to dinner to announce their engagement. While James was in the bathroom, Amanda casually mentioned how she hoped to convince him to take a job in California, far away from the dreary Portland weather and his boring hometown connections. The way she looked at me made it clear I was included in those connections she wanted to leave behind. At their wedding, I smiled through my tears and welcomed her to our small family. I tried so hard to make her feel like a daughter, but Amanda maintained a polite distance. After they married, the Sunday dinners became monthly, then quarterly. Phone calls grew shorter and less frequent. James always had an excuse about being busy with work or social obligations. I noticed how he would check with Amanda before committing to any plans with me. 2 years into their marriage, Amanda gave birth to their daughter Lily. I was overjoyed at becoming a grandmother and rushed to the hospital with a handmade baby blanket I had spent months knitting. Amanda barely acknowledged the gift, instead commenting that they had already purchased designer nursery items that matched their home decor perfectly. I was allowed to hold my granddaughter for precisely 5 minutes before being told that the new mother needed rest. As Lily grew, my opportunities to see her were strictly controlled. Birthday parties and holidays were scheduled when Amanda's parents could attend, but somehow the timing never worked for me. 3 years later, they had their son Noah. This time I wasn't even called until 2 days after the birth. The pattern continued, with James becoming increasingly distant and Amanda orchestrating their family life in a way that conveniently excluded me. The final breaking point came during Lily's 5th birthday. I had been invited almost as an afterthought to their home for the celebration. I brought a beautiful dollhouse I had saved up for months to purchase. When Lily opened it, her eyes lit up with excitement. Amanda immediately stepped in, saying it was too elaborate and would clutter their minimalist home. She suggested they could keep it at my place for when Lily visited, knowing full well those visits never happened. I finally spoke up, asking quietly if we could discuss a regular schedule for me to see my grandchildren. Amanda's face hardened as she accused me of trying to control their family and interfere with their parenting. James, who had once been my closest ally, stood silently by his wife's side. When I looked to him for support, he simply said, "Mom, you need to respect our boundaries. Amanda feels uncomfortable with your constant pressure." constant pressure. I had called maybe once a month and sent birthday and Christmas cards. That was considered pressure. I left their house in tears that day, and it would be the last time I saw my son or grandchildren for 12 long years. In the months that followed, I tried everything to reconnect. I called James at work, sent heartfelt letters apologizing for any perceived offense, and even tried to arrange mediation with our family pastor. Nothing worked. James had chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. My phone calls went unanswered. My letters were returned, unopened, and eventually I discovered they had moved to a larger home in the suburbs without even telling me their new address. The loneliness that followed was almost unbearable. I continued working at the hospital, finding solace in caring for my patients, but came home each night to an empty house filled with family photos from happier times. The first year, I still set a place for James at Thanksgiving and Christmas, hoping he might appear. By the second year, I had stopped bothering with holiday decorations altogether. Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket. My coworkers noticed the change, how the light had gone out of my eyes. I started turning down social invitations, preferring to sit alone in my apartment after work, flipping through old photo albums, and wondering where I had gone wrong as a mother. Every birthday, every Christmas, every Mother's Day, I would make one attempt to reach out. A card, a voicemail, a small gift for the grandchildren I was rapidly becoming a stranger to. Most went unacknowledged. Occasionally, I would receive a terse text message from James. "Got your card. We're all fine. Busy with work." No photos, no details about my grandchildren's lives. No invitation to reconnect. I watched from a distance, through mutual friends, as Lily entered middle school and Noah elementary. I heard that James had been promoted to partner at his firm, that Amanda had started her own interior design business. Life was moving forward for them, while I remained frozen in time, stuck in the moment of that final argument, replaying it over and over, wondering if there was something different I could have said or done. My 60th birthday marked the lowest point. I sat alone in my apartment, a single cupcake with a candle in front of me, waiting for a phone call that never came. No card. No acknowledgement that I was still alive, and part of their family, at least biologically. That night I cried myself to sleep and wondered if this emptiness would be my companion for whatever years I had left. The next morning I arrived at work, puffy-eyed and exhausted. Eleanor, a fellow nurse who had joined our unit a few months earlier, took one look at me and guided me into the break room. She was about my age, also single, with a no-nonsense attitude that somehow never came across as unkind. I found myself telling her everything, the words pouring out like water from a broken dam. I had kept my family situation, mostly private over the years, too, ashamed to admit my own son had abandoned me. Eleanor listened without interruption, then said something that would change the course of my life. "Hilda, you have spent 12 years giving them the power to determine your happiness. It is time to take that power back." Something about her straightforward delivery broke through my fog of self-pity. She invited me to join her for dinner that evening, refusing to take no for an answer. Over pasta, at her cozy bungalow, I met someone who would become my closest friend. Eleanor had her own story of family estrangement, but had rebuilt her life on her own terms. Her home was filled with art from her travels, photos of friends, and evidence of a rich, full life that had nothing to do with biological connections. "Family is who shows up," she told me. "It took me too many years to learn that lesson, and I won't let you waste any more of yours." With Eleanor's encouragement, I began taking small steps toward building a new life. I joined the local community center and signed up for a watercolor painting class. something I had always wanted to try but never made time for. My first attempts were laughable, but I discovered I loved the process, the way the colors blended on the paper, creating something from nothing. Through the class, I met Marilyn and Doris, two widows, who quickly folded me into their social circle. Suddenly, I had standing lunch dates on Tuesdays, movie nights on Fridays, and people who checked in on me regularly. They never pressured me to talk about my estrangement from James, but they created a safe space where I could share my feelings when I needed to. When I mentioned my lifelong love of the ocean, Marilyn suggested we take a day trip to Newport Beach. That first glimpse of the vast Pacific, the rhythmic crashing of waves against the shore, awakened something dormant inside me. I felt small against the vastness of the ocean, but somehow that made my problems seem smaller too. We started making monthly trips to different beaches along the Oregon coast, my camera filling with snapshots of tide pools, driftwood, and horizons that seemed to stretch into infinity. Eleanor suggested I try volunteering, pointing out that my nursing skills could be valuable outside the hospital setting. I started spending Saturday mornings at a children's hospital reading to kids undergoing long-term treatment. The first time a 7-year-old leukemia patient fell asleep against my shoulder, her tiny hand clutching mine, I felt needed in a way I hadn't in years. These children, with their resilience and unflagging spirits, despite facing enormous challenges, put my own troubles into perspective. My watercolor instructor noticed I had a particular talent for capturing coastal scenes and encouraged me to develop this focus. I began bringing back shells, sand, and small pieces of driftwood from our beach trips, incorporating them into mixed media pieces that combined painting and natural elements. To my surprise, several of my pieces sold at the community center's annual art show. The validation was intoxicating, this proof that I could create something others valued. As the months passed, I found myself smiling, more sleeping better, and looking forward to each day. The hole in my heart, where James and his family had been, remained, but it no longer defined me. I started keeping a gratitude journal, Eleanor's suggestion, and found that focusing on the good things in my life, no matter how small, gradually shifted my perspective. There were still difficult moments. Mother's Day remained painful. Seeing grandparents with their grandchildren in parks or shopping malls would sometimes trigger a wave of grief so intense I would have to sit down until it passed. But those moments became less frequent and less debilitating over time. On my 61st birthday, instead of sitting alone with a cupcake, I found myself surrounded by a dozen friends at Eleanor's house, being serenaded with an off-key but heartfelt rendition of Happy Birthday. Looking around at these faces, people who chose to be in my life rather than were obligated by blood, I felt a contentment I hadn't experienced in years. Next year, Eleanor announced as she handed me a gift, we should take a real vacation. You have never been to California, and I think it is high time you saw the redwoods. The idea of planning something a year in advance, of assuming I would still be healthy and alive and surrounded by friends, represented a fundamental shift in my outlook. I was no longer just existing day to day. I was living again, making plans, having things to look forward to. With the support of my new chosen family, I began to shed the identity of abandoned mother and embrace new possibilities. I retired from full-time nursing, but kept a part-time schedule at a clinic, giving me more time for my art and volunteer work. I joined a hiking group for seniors and discovered muscles I had forgotten existed. Eleanor and I took cooking classes and learned to make paella and Thai curry, expanding our horizons through food when travel wasn't possible. Slowly but surely, I was building a life that was rich and meaningful, one that existed completely independent of James and his family. The ache was still there, a dull background throb rather than the acute pain it had once been. I had stopped reaching out on holidays and birthdays, accepting that continuing to do so was just picking at a wound that needed to heal. Instead, I focused on being present for the people who were present for me. 3 years into my journey of self-renewal, life took another unexpected turn. I received a letter from a law firm in Seattle informing me that my brother David had passed away and named me as his sole beneficiary. David and I had grown apart after a disagreement over our parents' care decades earlier. He had moved to Seattle, built a successful real estate business, and never married. We exchanged Christmas cards, but little else. I hadn't even known he was ill. The inheritance was substantial, $750,000 plus property assets. I sat in the lawyer's office in Seattle, staring at the documents in disbelief. The brother I had barely spoken to in 20 years had left me everything with a simple note. Hilda always tried to do the right thing, even when I didn't. My first feeling wasn't joy, but guilt. I hadn't been there for David at the end. I hadn't known about his battle with cancer or been able to say goodbye. The money felt like something I hadn't earned and didn't deserve. I returned to Portland in a daze, unsure what to do with this unexpected windfall. Eleanor, practical, as always, suggested I consult a financial advisor. Feeling guilty won't bring David back, she said gently, but using his gift wisely would honor his memory. Margaret, the financial advisor Eleanor recommended, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who specialized in helping women manage unexpected wealth. She listened to my story, assessed my current financial situation, and helped me develop a comprehensive plan. The majority would be invested conservatively to provide additional retirement security. Some would be set aside for potential medical expenses as I aged. A portion would go to charities I cared about, including the Children's Hospital where I volunteered. "And what about a dream?" Margaret asked toward the end of our meeting. "Everyone should use at least a small portion of a windfall for something that brings them joy." I hesitated, not used to thinking about personal dreams after so many years of just getting by. "I've always loved the ocean," I finally admitted. "Our day trips to the coast are the times I feel most at peace." "Have you ever thought about living there?" Margaret asked. "Real estate on the Oregon coast can be expensive, but not impossible with your inheritance." The idea took root and quickly blossomed. A small house near the ocean where I could wake up to the sound of waves and paint the ever-changing seascape from my own porch. It seemed too indulgent, too perfect to be possible. But Margaret showed me the numbers, how I could afford a modest oceanfront property and still maintain financial security. Eleanor was enthusiastic when I shared the idea, immediately volunteering to help with house hunting. We spent weekends driving up and down the coast, exploring different towns and neighborhoods. Seaside was too touristy, Astoria too far north and rainy. Cannon Beach was beautiful but prohibitively expensive. Newport captured my heart with its working harbor, historic bayfront, and artistic community. It was large enough to have good medical facilities for someone my age, but small enough to foster a sense of community. After looking at numerous properties, I found it a blue 2-bedroom cottage, perched on a bluff overlooking the bay. The house was older, built in the 1960s, but well-maintained with large windows that filled it with natural light and framed the spectacular ocean view. Standing in the living room during the showing, watching fishing boats move across the bay while seagulls wheeled overhead, I felt a certainty I hadn't experienced in years. This was meant to be my home. The asking price was at the upper end of my budget, but after some negotiation, the owners accepted my offer. David's unexpected gift was transforming into a new chapter of my life. The day I signed the final papers was emotional. I kept thinking about the strange path that had led me here, how loss and pain had eventually opened the door to this new beginning. The real estate agent handed me the keys with a warm smile, welcoming me to Newport. I drove straight to the house, my house, and sat on the back deck watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and pink. Eleanor arrived the next day with champagne and helped me plan the move. We measured rooms, discussed furniture placement, and dreamed about the gallery wall where I would hang my coastal paintings. Friends from Portland offered to help pack and unpack, turning what could have been a stressful experience into something joyful. The community I had built over the past 3 years showed up for me in ways large and small. Moving day arrived and a caravan of cars made the 2-hour drive from Portland to Newport. By evening, most of the boxes were unpacked, furniture was arranged, and my new home was beginning to take shape. My friends insisted on hanging curtains and making up my bed before they left, wanting to ensure I would be comfortable on my first night. As the last car pulled away, I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by housewarming gifts, many handmade by my artist friends. A quilted wall, hanging from Maryland beach glass wind chimes from Doris. A set of hand-thrown pottery mugs from my watercolor instructor. I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for these people who had helped me rebuild my life when it seemed beyond repair. That first night in my ocean home, I sat on the deck bundled in a sweater against the cool evening air, listening to the rhythmic sound of waves below. The moon cast a silver path across the water, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of true contentment. I had built this new life for myself, one choice at a time, one day at a time. The pain of James's rejection would always be part of me, but it no longer defined me. I slept deeply that night, rocked by the distant sound of the ocean, my dreams filled with possibilities rather than regrets. I awoke to sunlight streaming through new curtains and the call of seagulls. Making coffee in my kitchen, looking out at the morning light on the water, I felt a quiet joy and anticipation for this new chapter. I was 65 years old, starting over in a new town, and surprisingly optimistic about what lay ahead. After breakfast, I decided to unpack my art supplies and set up a small studio area in the spare bedroom. The light in there was perfect, and the windows provided a slightly different angle on the bay. I could envision myself spending hours in this space, translating what I saw outside into artwork that captured not just the visual beauty, but the feeling of peace this place gave me. I was organizing brushes and paints when the doorbell rang an unexpected sound in my new home where I knew no one yet. Assuming it was a neighbor coming to introduce themselves, I wiped paint-stained hands on my jeans and went to answer it, a welcoming smile already in place. The smile froze on my face as I opened the door. The aggressive ringing continued, even as I approached the door, impatient finger leaning on the bell. When I pulled it open, time seemed to stop. There on my porch stood James, older and heavier than I remembered, his hairline receded and new lines etched around his eyes. Beside him was Amanda, still attractive at 45, but with a hardness to her features that hadn't been there before. And behind them, 2 teenagers I barely recognized, though I had their school photos from years ago stored in a box I couldn't bring myself to throw away. "Mom," James said, breaking the stunned silence. His voice was deeper than I remembered, or maybe it was the 12 years of absence that made it sound foreign to my ears. I couldn't speak, my throat constricted with a flood of emotions, none of which I could adequately name. Joy, anger, confusion, hurt hope, suspicion, all battling for dominance. I noticed the luggage at their feet, 4 suitcases of varying sizes, and a cold feeling settled in my stomach. Surprise, Amanda said with a brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. We were in the area and heard you move to this gorgeous place. She peered past me into the house, her gaze calculating as it swept over what she could see of the living room. It's absolutely charming. The teenagers, Lily, now 17, and Noah, 14, stood awkwardly behind their parents. Lily was tapping on her phone, barely looking up, while Noah stared at me with undisguised curiosity, as if trying to reconcile this gray-haired woman with whatever vague memories he might have of a grandmother from early childhood. "How did you find me?" The question came out harsher than I intended, but they were the only words I could force past the knot in my throat. James shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor called me. She found my work number somehow. Eleanor. My closest friend had gone behind my back to contact my son. I felt a flash of betrayal before rationality took over. Eleanor would not have done this without good reason. She knew better than anyone how deeply James's rejection had wounded me. "May we come in?" Amanda asked, using my first name as she always had, never Mom, or even Mrs. Winters. "It's been such a long drive." Still speechless, I stepped back, allowing them to enter. They filed past me, the teenagers immediately dropping onto my sofa, while James and Amanda stood awkwardly in the center of the living room. A silence descended 12 years of absence, creating a chasm too wide to be bridged with casual small talk. "This view is incredible," Amanda finally said, moving to the windows. "You can see the entire bay from here. The property values in this area must be impressive." Of course she would think of money first. I noticed James wince slightly at her comment. "What brings you to Newport?" I asked, finding my voice at last. "It's not exactly on the way to anywhere." James and Amanda exchanged a glance, some unspoken communication passing between them. James cleared his throat. "We've had some financial setbacks recently. I lost my position at the firm 6 months ago, and we had to sell the house. We've been staying with Amanda's parents, but it's been difficult with the kids. Grandma and Grandpa Thornton have literally no internet," Lily interjected without looking up from her phone. "And they go to bed at like 9. It's prison." I noted how she referred to Amanda's parents as Grandma and Grandpa titles I had never been allowed to claim. "We thought maybe we could stay with you for a little while," James continued, not quite meeting my eyes. "Just until we get back on our feet. I have some promising job leads, and Amanda has a few interior design clients, but nothing steady yet." The audacity was breathtaking. 12 years of silence, 12 years of rejected holiday invitations, missed birthdays, and returned cards, and now they expected to move into my new sanctuary because it was convenient for them. Part of me wanted to point to the door and tell them to leave immediately, to let them experience a fraction of the rejection I had lived with for over a decade. But looking at James, I saw flashes of the little boy who had once run to me with skinned knees, the teenager who had proudly shown me his first A in algebra, the young man who had wept on my shoulder at his father's funeral, and the teenagers, my grandchildren, who were strangers through no fault of their own, products of their parents' choices. "The guest room only has one bed," I said finally, "and the sofa doesn't pull out." "We can make it work," Amanda said quickly, shooting James a triumphant look. "The kids can use sleeping bags on the floor. We won't be any trouble, I promise. And I have some wonderful ideas about how to update this place. The potential is amazing. Already planning to remake my home in her image. Some things never changed." "We should have called first," James said, seeming to sense my hesitation. "I know this is sudden, Mom, but we really are in a difficult spot, and family should help family, right?" Family should help family. The words hung in the air between us, laden with irony. Where was that sentiment during the 12 years I had faced holidays alone? Where was family obligation when I had reached out time and again, only to be rebuffed or ignored? "Let me think about it," I said, needing time to process this bombshell. "You can stay tonight and we'll talk more tomorrow." Relief washed over James's face, while disappointment flashed briefly across Amanda's. She had clearly expected immediate capitulation, the doormat mother-in-law eager for any scraps of family connection. But I was not that woman anymore. "Thank you, Mom," James said, and for a moment his voice held genuine gratitude. I showed them where to find towels and extra blankets, made up the guest room for James and Amanda, and helped the kids create makeshift beds on the living room floor. The domestic activity filled the awkward silence, giving us all something to focus on besides the elephant in the room, the 12-year absence. We were all pretending not to see. That night I lay awake in my bedroom, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of other people in my home. The occasional flush of the toilet, muffled voices, the buzz of text messages. My peaceful sanctuary had been invaded less than 24 hours after I had claimed it. I wondered if Eleanor had known they were planning to descend on me like this when she contacted James. I doubted it. She would have warned me. In the darkness, memories flooded back. The Christmas 5 years ago, when I had driven to their house gifts in the back seat, only to find the lights off and the driveway empty. They had gone to Hawaii and not bothered to tell me. The graduation announcement for Lily's middle school ceremony that arrived 3 days after the event. The time I had fallen and broken my wrist, spent 3 days in the hospital, and not even bothered to call James because I knew he wouldn't come. And now here they were, sleeping under my roof, expecting me to welcome them with open arms because it was convenient for them. The unfairness of it made my chest tight with anger. Yet beneath the anger was a treacherous current of hope, a foolish part of me that still yearned for reconciliation for the family I had lost. Sleep eluded me that night as I wrestled with these conflicting emotions. By morning, I had made no decisions, only determined to observe and proceed with caution. I would not be rushing headlong into heartbreak again. Morning brought chaos to my usually quiet routine. Amanda took over the kitchen, rearranging items in my cupboards without asking as she prepared an elaborate breakfast. Lily monopolized the bathroom for over an hour. Noah sprawled across the living room floor with video games that made constant electronic beeping sounds. James sat at my dining table with his laptop papers spread everywhere occasionally, making tense phone calls I tried not to overhear. They had colonized my space completely in less than 24 hours, treating my home as if it were a hotel or worse already their property. No one asked permission before using my things or changing my arrangements. No one seemed to consider that they were guests in a home I had only just settled into myself. "Mom, do you mind if I hook up my printer in your office space?" James called out, already unpacking the device. "I need to print some resumes." Before I could answer, Amanda interjected. "This kitchen is so dated, but it has good bones. Have you considered taking out this wall to create an open concept? It would make the space flow so much better." "I like my walls where they are," I replied, trying to keep my tone even. "And James, I'd prefer if you used the desk in the guest room for your work things." A flicker of annoyance crossed both their faces, as if my preferences for my own home were an inconvenience to them. I caught Amanda shooting James a look that clearly said, "Handle this." James adopted the placating tone he had always used when trying to manage a situation. "Of course, Mom. Whatever you want. We're just trying to settle in and be helpful." "I don't need help rearranging my kitchen or redesigning my house," I said firmly. "What I need is to understand exactly what your plans are. How long do you anticipate staying here? The question created immediate tension. James and Amanda exchanged another of their loaded glances. Well, as I mentioned, I have some promising job leads. James began his voice, taking on a salesman's cadence that was new to me. One in particular, with a firm in Portland, looks very positive. Of course, the commute from here would be challenging, but we could make it work temporarily. Temporarily meaning what days, weeks, months, I pressed. It's hard to put an exact timeline on these things, Mom, James said with forced patience. The job market is tough right now, especially for someone my age. We were thinking perhaps through the summer, Amanda added. It would give the kids stability to finish the school year here. Noah could enroll in the local middle school, and Lily could do her remaining classes online. Summer was 3 months away. They were proposing to live with me for an entire season at minimum. The prospect was daunting. That's a significant commitment, I said carefully. One we should have discussed before you arrived with suitcases. We didn't have many options, Amanda said, a defensive edge to her voice. My parents' condo is too small, and James's job loss has affected our credit. No landlord will rent to us without significant deposits we can't afford right now. This was the first hint that their financial problems might be more serious than a temporary setback. I wondered what had really happened at James's firm. Partners didn't typically lose their positions without cause. Over the next few days, a routine of sorts developed. I retreated to my small art studio as much as possible, the one room they seemed to respect as my personal space. James spent hours on his laptop or phone, allegedly pursuing job opportunities. Amanda alternated between criticizing my decor and making unsolicited suggestions for home improvements. The teenagers remained absorbed in their devices, emerging mainly for meals which they complained about unless Amanda prepared them. The first real argument erupted when I established a house rule about phones at the dinner table. Noah rolled his eyes dramatically, while Lily acted as if I had suggested cutting off her arm. Mom, the kids need their phones, James defended. It's how they stay connected to their friends. They can stay connected before and after meals, I insisted. Dinner is for conversation. We've never had that rule in our house, Amanda said with a tight smile. We believe in letting the kids manage their own screen time responsibly. From what I could see, that approach had resulted in 2 teenagers who could barely maintain eye contact or carry on a basic conversation. But I bit my tongue, choosing my battles carefully. A week into their stay, Eleanor came to visit, bringing housewarming cookies, and barely concealed curiosity about my unexpected house guests. I introduced her with deliberate formality, watching James squirm slightly under her assessing gaze. He knew she was aware of the years of rejection, the pain he had caused. Your mother is quite beloved in Portland, Eleanor said pleasantly, as she accepted a cup of tea. We miss her terribly already. Such a talented artist and compassionate volunteer. The children at the hospital still ask when Miss Hilda is coming back to read to them. I could see confusion on James's face as he processed this information about a life he knew nothing about. The mother, he remembered, had been defined by her relation to him. The woman Eleanor described had an identity and value completely separate from her role as his mother. After Eleanor left, I confronted her privately about contacting James. As I suspected, she had reached out only to inform him of my move, believing he should have my new address in case of emergency. She had no idea they were planning to descend on me with luggage and indefinite plans to stay. You have every right to send them packing, she told me bluntly. What I witnessed today was not a family reunion, it was an occupation. Her assessment was harsh but accurate. I was being used and I knew it, yet I still hesitated to draw the hard line that would send them away. Despite everything, they were my only family by blood. and the thought of getting to know my grandchildren, even under these circumstances, held powerful appeal. The situation deteriorated further when I discovered the real reason for James's job loss. I overheard him on the phone with a former colleague admitting he had borrowed from client accounts to cover gambling debts. The firm had given him the option to resign rather than face charges, provided he entered a treatment program, which he had apparently abandoned after 2 sessions. That night I checked my bank statements online and changed all my passwords, a precaution that made me sad but seemed necessary. James had a problem far more serious than temporary unemployment, one that explained their dire financial straits. Amanda's behavior grew more presumptuous by the day. She invited an interior designer friend to come assess my outdated living room without consulting me first. She began moving my furniture when I was out volunteering at the local library. She questioned every purchase I made, from groceries to art supplies, with thinly veiled suggestions about saving money now that I was supporting 4 extra people. The teenagers remained largely indifferent to me, though Noah occasionally showed interest in my paintings. Lily existed in a bubble of adolescent self-absorption, emerging only to complain about the slow internet or lack of activities in Newport. Neither acknowledged the awkwardness of suddenly living with a grandmother they barely knew, nor did they express any curiosity about the years of separation. 3 weeks into this uncomfortable arrangement, Eleanor visited again, this time for dinner. Amanda made a show of preparing an elaborate meal, positioning herself as the lady of the house while I was relegated to guest status in my own home. Throughout the evening, she made comments about when we repaint this room and once we replace these outdated appliances, speaking as if my home were already transitioning to their possession. After dinner, Eleanor pulled me aside. "What exactly is their endgame here, Hilda? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like they're planning to establish residency, not make a temporary visit." Her question crystallized a suspicion that had been forming in my mind. Amanda's constant focus on home improvements, James's vague timeline for finding work the way they were gradually taking over. More and more of the house all pointed to a plan more permanent than a brief stay until they got back on their feet. The next morning, passing the guest room with a laundry basket, I overheard Amanda and James in conversation. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but Amanda's words stopped me cold. "Once we're established here, we can look at putting the house in our names," she was saying. "Your mother is getting older, and she'll need someone to manage her affairs eventually. It makes sense for us to take over before there are any issues with her competency." James's response was too quiet to hear clearly, but I caught phrases like "too soon" and "give it time." Amanda's voice rose slightly. "We don't have time, James. We're practically homeless. Your credit is destroyed, and this place is the only asset we have access to. Your mother doesn't need a house this size anyway. Once we take over, she can move into a senior apartment, something manageable for someone her age." I stood, frozen laundry, clutched to my chest, as the truth of their presence in my life became brutally clear. This wasn't about reconciliation or family connection. It wasn't even just about needing temporary shelter. They wanted my house, the dream home. I had only just acquired the sanctuary I had created for myself after years of building a new life. I retreated to my studio, mind racing. The betrayal cut deep, reopening wounds I thought had begun to heal. After everything, after the years of rejection and absence, they had returned, not because they missed me or wanted to repair our relationship, but because they saw me as a solution to their financial problems, an old woman with an asset they could claim. The following day, I maintained a facade of normalcy, needing time to process what I had overheard and decide how to respond. James left for Portland, supposedly for a job interview. The teenagers were at the beach, a rare venture outside without their devices. I was in my studio painting when I heard drawers opening and closing in my bedroom. Moving quietly down the hallway, I found Amanda going through my desk, my financial folders spread across the bed. She was photographing documents with her phone, so absorbed in her task she didn't notice me standing in the doorway. Looking for something specific, I asked, my voice steady, despite the anger coursing through me. Amanda startled, nearly dropping her phone. "Hilda, I was just organizing your paperwork. Everything was such a mess, and I thought it would help if I created a system for you." The lie was so transparent, it would have been laughable under different circumstances. I stepped into the room and began gathering the scattered papers, my property deed, and investment statements among them. "I may be older, Amanda, but I'm not senile or stupid," I said, surprising myself with my calm tone. "I know exactly what you're doing, and it stops now." Her expression shifted from fake contrition to cold calculation. "I don't know what you think you heard or saw, but James and I are just trying to help. You're not getting any younger, and this house is too much for you to manage alone." "I was managing perfectly well before you arrived," I replied, "and I'll manage perfectly well after you leave, which needs to happen soon." Amanda's mask of politeness dropped completely. "You'd throw your own family out. After we came to you for help, we have nowhere else to go." "We haven't been family for 12 years, Amanda. Not since you and James decided I wasn't worth including in your lives." "That was different," she dismissed with a wave of her hand. "You were too controlling, always wanting to be involved. We needed space." "Space is not the same as complete abandonment," I said, my voice finally betraying some of the hurt. "You didn't give me space, you erased me. 12 years of holidays alone. 12 years of birthdays and special occasions I missed with my grandchildren. 12 years of reaching out, only to be rejected or ignored." Amanda's face hardened. "Well, we didn't need you for those 12 years, did we? We managed just fine without your interference. It's only because of James's temporary setback that we're here at all." The casual cruelty of her words, the confirmation that they had only returned because they needed something from me, was the final blow to any hope I had harbored for genuine reconciliation. "I want you out of my house by the end of the week," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. "You can't do that," Amanda sputtered, genuine alarm replacing her anger. "We have rights as tenants." "You're not tenants. You're unwelcome guests who have overstayed their welcome and violated my privacy and trust." "James won't allow this," she threatened. "He's your son, your only child. You'd make your own son homeless." James stopped being my son in any meaningful way the day he chose to cut me out of his life without explanation or chance for amends. And from what I overheard yesterday, he's fully aware of your plan to take my house. Color drained from Amanda's face as she realized I had heard their conversation. Before she could formulate a response, the front door opened, and James called out, announcing his return. Amanda rushed past me, no doubt, to warn him that their scheme had been discovered. I remained in my bedroom, gathering the scattered financial documents and securing them in a lockbox. My hands were steady, but my heart raced with a mixture of anger, hurt, and strange relief. The pretense was over. The truth, however painful, was preferable to the ongoing charade of family reunion. When I emerged, James was waiting in the living room, Amanda beside him, with arms crossed defensively. He attempted a conciliatory smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mom, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he began in the smooth, placating tone I was growing to detest. "There's no misunderstanding, James. I heard you and Amanda discussing plans to take my house and move me into a senior apartment. and I just caught her going through my financial papers without permission." James shot Amanda an irritated look before turning back to me. "It wasn't like that. We were just discussing long-term options for all of us. Family helping family." "Stop saying that," I said, my voice finally breaking. "Stop using the word family as a weapon. We haven't been a family since Lily's 5th birthday party, when you decided I was too controlling and cut me out of your lives. 12 years, James. 12 years of silence." "You're exaggerating," he dismissed. "We sent Christmas cards. Form letters with no personal message, no phone calls, no visits, no responses to my attempts to connect. I was alone, every holiday, every birthday. I broke my wrist 5 years ago and spent 3 days in the hospital and didn't even bother to call you because I knew you wouldn't come." A flicker of something perhaps genuine shame crossed James's face before he composed himself. "The past is the past, Mom. We're here now trying to make a fresh start. You're here because you gambled away your job and savings and see me as your financial safety net. That's not family, that's opportunism." James flinched, as if I'd slapped him. "How did you—" "I overheard your phone call. The truth has a way of coming out, James, just like I now know the real reason you're so interested in my house." Amanda stepped forward, abandoning pretense entirely. "Be reasonable, Hilda. This house is too big for one person. We're a family of 4. It makes logical sense for us to live here, and for you to downsize. We'd make sure you were taken care of." The condescension in her tone, the assumption that at 67 I was incapable of managing my own affairs, ignited a slow, burning fury within me. Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was Eleanor checking in, as she had promised to do daily since my unwanted guests arrived. Stepping away from James and Amanda, I answered my voice, betraying my distress, despite my efforts to sound normal. Eleanor, attuned to my emotional state after years of friendship, immediately offered to come over. I accepted gratefully, needing an ally in what had become an increasingly hostile environment. After hanging up, I turned back to James and Amanda. "Eleanor will be here shortly. I'd prefer if we continue this discussion with a neutral third party present. We don't need outsiders involved in family business," Amanda objected. "Eleanor is more family to me than either of you have been for the past decade," I replied simply. The truth of that statement hung in the air between us, undeniable and damning. James looked away first, unable to meet my gaze. Amanda's lips thinned to a tight line of displeasure, but she said nothing more. We waited in uncomfortable silence until Eleanor arrived, bringing with her the brisk, no-nonsense energy that had been my lifeline during dark times. She assessed the situation quickly, noting the tension and my carefully controlled distress. "I think Hilda and I need a few minutes alone," she announced. Not a suggestion, but a command. Surprisingly, James and Amanda complied, retreating to the guest room while Eleanor led me to the kitchen. Once alone, I broke down the full weight of the betrayal, finally crashing over me. Between sobs, I explained what I had discovered: the calculated plan to take advantage of me, the casual cruelty of Amanda's dismissal of our years of estrangement. Eleanor listened without interruption, her face growing increasingly troubled. When I finished, she took my hands in hers, her grip warm and steady. "Hilda, this is elder abuse," she said bluntly. "Financial exploitation is a form of abuse, and that's exactly what they're attempting. You need to protect yourself." Her clear naming of what was happening cut through my emotional turmoil. She was right. This wasn't merely a family disagreement or misunderstanding. It was a deliberate attempt to manipulate and take advantage of me because of my age and perceived vulnerability. "What should I do?" I asked, feeling stronger with her support. "First, Secure all your important documents and valuables. Change any passwords they might have accessed. Then give them a firm deadline to leave in writing. If they refuse, we'll involve legal authorities. Her practical approach helped me regain my composure. Eleanor had always been good in a crisis, focusing on concrete steps rather than getting lost in emotional reactions. It was one of the qualities I most valued in her friendship. "I need to be clear with them," I said, wiping away the last of my tears. "No more manipulation or guilt trips." Eleanor nodded approval. "You're stronger than they think, Hilda. You rebuilt your life once after they abandoned you. You can certainly stand your ground now." Her confidence in me bolstered my resolve. I straightened my shoulders and took a deep breath, ready to face the confrontation ahead. It was time to break the pattern of enabling their behavior time, to finally stand up for myself. With Eleanor by my side, I called a family meeting in the living room. James and Amanda sat stiffly on the sofa, while the teenagers, sensing the tension, hovered uncertainly in the background. I remained standing, drawing strength from Eleanor's steady presence beside me. "I want to be very clear about what happens next." I began, my voice calmer and more authoritative than I had expected. "This arrangement is not working, and it cannot continue as it has been." Amanda started to interrupt, but I held up my hand, silencing her. "Please, let me finish. For 12 years, you chose to exclude me from your lives. No explanations, no opportunities to resolve whatever issues you had with me. Just silence and rejection. I reached out consistently for years, sending cards, gifts, leaving messages, all of which were either ignored or acknowledged with the bare minimum of response." I looked directly at James, whose gaze dropped to the floor. I missed seeing my grandchildren grow up. I missed holidays, birthdays, school events, all the milestones that grandparents should be present for. I spent those years alone, believing there was something fundamentally unlovable about me that made my only son turn his back so completely. My voice wavered slightly, but I pressed on. "Then you appeared on my doorstep, not because you missed me or wanted to repair our relationship, but because you needed something from me. A place to stay, financial security. Eventually, as I now know my house itself." Amanda's face flushed with anger, or embarrassment, perhaps both. James continued to stare at the floor. "I am not going to ask you to leave immediately," I continued. "I recognize that you have limited options right now, but there will be conditions to your staying here temporarily, and a definite end date." Now I had their full attention. Even the teenagers looked up from their phones, sensing a shift in the power dynamic they had taken for granted. "First, this is my home, and my rules will be respected. No going through my personal papers. No rearranging my furniture or criticizing my decor. No discussions about me downsizing or you taking over the property. Those are non-negotiable boundaries." I turned specifically to James. "Second, if you want to stay here even temporarily, you will need to address your gambling addiction. I will help you find a local support group, and attendance will be mandatory, not optional, like the program your firm arranged." James flinched, but nodded slightly, perhaps relieved that I was acknowledging his problem rather than simply condemning him for it. "Third, the entire family will attend financial management classes. The community college offers them for free. This situation didn't happen overnight, and all of you need better skills to prevent it from recurring." Amanda bristled visibly at this requirement, but I continued before she could object. "Fourth, I expect everyone to contribute to the household. The teenagers will help with chores. James and Amanda, you will need to find at least part-time work, not just focus on long-term career opportunities. Even temporary positions will help you rebuild your credit and employment history." I paused, making sure they understood these weren't suggestions but requirements. "Finally, this arrangement has a 3-month time limit. By the end of that period, you need to have secured your own housing, even if it's just a small apartment, while you continue rebuilding financially." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. I could see the calculations happening behind Amanda's eyes, weighing their options, realizing they had few alternatives. "And if we don't agree to these terms," she finally asked, a challenge in her voice. "Then you'll need to leave by the end of the week," I replied simply. "I'm offering a temporary safety net with conditions, not unconditional support, regardless of your behavior. The choice is yours." James finally looked up, meeting my eyes, for the first time since the conversation began. "We'll comply with your terms, Mom, and I'm sorry for everything." The apology felt inadequate after 12 years of absence, but it was a start. I nodded, acknowledgement, not yet ready to offer forgiveness that hadn't been properly earned. "I'll draw up a written agreement tomorrow," I said. "For now, I think we all need some space to process." Eleanor and I left them to discuss their options, retreating to my studio where we could speak privately. She hugged me tightly, pride evident in her expression. "You did it," she said warmly. "You stood your ground and set boundaries. That took incredible courage." It had, though the hardest part lay ahead, actually enforcing those boundaries day by day. But having finally voiced the pain of the past 12 years, having named the manipulation for what it was, I felt lighter somehow, more capable of navigating the challenging weeks ahead. The next morning, James approached me alone while Amanda was showering. "I mean it, Mom. I am sorry. When Amanda and I first decided to create some distance, I never intended it to become a complete separation. Things just escalated, and then it had been so long, it seemed impossible to bridge the gap. Why did you never respond to my attempts to connect?" I asked the question that had haunted me for years. He looked ashamed. "At first it was because Amanda felt you were trying to undermine her parenting. Later it was pride, I guess. And eventually it was easier to pretend you were fine without us than to face what we'd done." It wasn't a satisfying answer, but it had the ring of truth. People often chose the path of least resistance, even when that path caused pain to others. I had spent years imagining elaborate reasons for their rejection, when the reality was probably this simple, this human, this flawed. Over the following weeks, an uneasy truce developed in the household. James attended Gamblers Anonymous meetings 3 times a week, sometimes returning with reddened eyes that suggested emotional breakthroughs. Amanda found part-time work at a local interior design shop, swallowing her pride to take a position well below what she considered her professional level. The teenagers, after initial resistance, began helping with household chores and even joined me occasionally in my studio Noah, showing genuine interest in learning to paint. The financial management classes were a particular source of tension. Amanda resented being treated like a child, as she put it, while James seemed genuinely engaged in learning better habits. The instructor, noticing the family dynamics, took me aside after one session to commend me for insisting on the classes, saying the knowledge could break generational patterns of financial dysfunction. As the weeks passed, small moments of genuine connection began to emerge from beneath the layers of resentment and hurt. Lily asked to see photos of her father as a child, leading to an afternoon of shared stories and laughter. Noah and I developed a ritual of early morning walks on the beach, collecting interesting shells and driftwood for art projects. Even Amanda occasionally let her guard down, sharing her fears about starting over professionally in her 40s. The most significant breakthrough came when James returned from a GA meeting visibly shaken. He asked to speak with me privately, and for the first time since their arrival, initiated a conversation about the past without prompting. "My sponsor had me make a list of all the people I've harmed through my addiction," he explained, voice unsteady. "You were at the top, Mom, not just because of the recent attempt to take advantage of your generosity, but because of the years before. I used Amanda's issues with you as an excuse, but the truth is I started pushing you away when my gambling was getting out of control. I was ashamed, and I couldn't bear the thought of you finding out." The revelation shifted my understanding of the past decade. While it didn't excuse their behavior, it provided context that helped me begin to process the rejection differently. Addiction created ripples of destruction far beyond the immediate financial consequences, corroding relationships and distorting priorities in ways that could take years to fully comprehend. True to the agreement, after 3 months, the family moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Newport. James had secured an entry-level accounting position at a local firm willing to rebuild his career from the ground up. Amanda continued her part-time work while building a client base for independent design consulting. The teenagers enrolled in local schools, adapting to their reduced circumstances with the resilience of youth. Their departure from my home brought both relief and a strange sense of loss. The constant tension was gone, allowing me to reclaim my sanctuary fully. Yet I found myself missing the morning walks with Noah, the sound of Lily's music filtering through the house, even James's quiet presence at the dining table as he worked on job applications. We established a new relationship, cautious but increasingly warm. Sunday dinners at my house became a tradition, but with clear start and end times that respected my need for privacy and independence. I attended Noah's first art show at his new school, proudly watching him explain his seascape paintings to visitors. Lily invited me to help plan her graduation party, seeking my input on decorations and food, rather than viewing me as an intrusion. 6 months after their initial appearance on my doorstep, we gathered on my deck for a small celebration of James's half-year sobriety milestone. As the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in brilliant orange and pink, I looked around at these people who were once again becoming family, in more than just name. "I never thought we'd be here," James said quietly, joining me at the railing while the others chatted around the table. "There were days I was sure you'd throw us out and we would have deserved it." "There were days I considered it," I admitted. "But family is complicated. It's not always blood that makes a family. Sometimes it's who shows up when it matters, who does the work to maintain connection, even when it's difficult." I thought of Eleanor and my other friends who had been my chosen family during the years of estrangement, who had helped me rebuild my sense of self when it had been shattered by rejection. "I'm glad we got a second chance," James said, tentative hope in his voice. "Even if we didn't deserve it." "Second chances aren't about deserving," I replied, thinking of all I had learned about forgiveness and boundaries over the past months. "They're about choice and commitment. You chose to do the work this time to face your addiction and its consequences. That made the difference." Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone on my deck with a cup of tea, listening to the rhythmic sound of waves against the shore below. The pain of those 12 years would always be part of my story, a period of profound loss and eventual growth. But it no longer defined me or my relationship with my son and his family. I had learned that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or pretending the hurt never happened. It meant creating a new relationship on healthier terms, with clear boundaries and mutual respect. It meant acknowledging the past while refusing to let it dictate the future. The ocean stretched before me, vast, and ever-changing, a reminder that life rarely followed a predictable course. My journey had taken me from abandonment to self-discovery, from loss to unexpected joy from a broken heart, to one that had healed stronger at the broken places. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have set firm boundaries like I did, or would you have handled things differently? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your dignity and find healing. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that sometimes our greatest pain can lead to our greatest growth if we're brave enough to face it honestly.